December 10th, 2025. A GPS station in the Bay of Naples records a measurement that stops Italian seismologists mid-sentence. The ground at Campi Flegrei has risen another 2.3 centimeters overnight. That reading pushes total vertical displacement to 147 centimeters, nearly 5 feet since the current crisis began accelerating in 2023. But the overnight spike is not what terrifies scientists. It is what the measurement confirms: the rupture sequence is accelerating. Dr. Alessandro Bonaccorso of INGV has studied volcanic ground deformation for 20 years. He has measured the slow breathing of Etna, tracked the subtle bulging of Stromboli, and monitored the gradual inflation of dozens of volcanic systems across Italy. But nothing in his experience prepared him for what is happening at Campi Flegrei. This is not normal volcanic breathing, Bonaccorso explains. This is systematic crustal destruction in real time. The numbers tell a chilling story. In the 1970s, it took Campi Flegrei 3 years to raise the ground 1.7 meters. The 1980s episode required 4 years to reach similar displacement. But the current rupture sequence has compressed that timeline dramatically, achieving 1.47 meters in just 24 months. The ground is not just rising faster, it is rising in patterns that reveal underground fracture networks being systematically stressed beyond their breaking points. Recent research published in Nature Communications confirms what local residents have been feeling. This is not random geological movement, it is the culmination of a rupture sequence that began in 1950 and has been building stress across 4 distinct episodes. Each cycle of uplift, seismic activity, and subsidence added strain to the caldera's structural framework. Each episode pushed the system further from stable equilibrium, and now, after 75 years of accumulated pressure, scientists say the process has become irreversible. But here is what makes this discovery bone-chilling. The uplift is not uniform across the caldera. GPS. Arrays reveal differential movement that traces the geometry of underground fault networks. Some areas rise faster than others. Some regions stretch horizontally while others compress vertically. The ground is being systematically deformed by forces that are preparing the crust for catastrophic failure. Dr. Christopher Kilburn's 2016 analysis predicted the system would reach critical stress after 30 to 40 centimeters of additional uplift. That threshold was exceeded in 2023. The caldera has now risen nearly 4 times beyond Kilburn's danger zone, and monthly displacement rates show no signs of slowing. Each GPS reading confirms the rupture sequence is approaching its terminal phase. When does systematic ground deformation become unstoppable crustal failure? And how long can 1 million people live on top of a geological system that has been dismantling itself for 75 years before it finally completes the destruction process? To understand the scale of the crisis now unfolding in Naples, we need to examine Campi Flegrei's long history of weaponizing ground movement against human infrastructure. This supervolcano's rap sheet stretches back over 39,000 years, a legacy of deformation that defies geological reason. The caldera's origin story is a cataclysm ripped straight from a disaster film. The Campanian ignimbrite eruption ejected 72 cubic miles of magma in a matter of days, burying southern Italy in ash and sending global temperatures plummeting. The true legacy of that prehistoric blast is written in the land it left behind, an 8-mile wide crater where a thriving metropolis now stands. Campi Flegrei's deformation patterns are what set it apart from any other volcanic system on Earth. The caldera floor does not just rise and fall, it oscillates up and down by meters without erupting, in a geological dance scientists call bradyseism. It is as if the volcano is practicing for catastrophe, flexing its seismic muscles without revealing its full destructive potential. The ancient Romans were the first to document this unnerving ground movement. The temple of Serapis in Pozzuoli, built in the 2nd century BC, century BC, tells a story of vertical displacement that reads like a geological fairy tale. Halfway up the temple's majestic columns, bore holes from marine mollusks scar the marble, evidence the entire structure was once submerged beneath the waves, only to be thrust back above sea level by the restless volcano. Roman harbour installations show similar battle scars, their ancient stones warped and twisted by a caldera that refuses to hold still. But it was not until the 1950s that modern science began to unravel the true nature of the threat lurking beneath Naples. When Italian geologists installed the first tide gauges and levelling lines across the caldera, they discovered a pattern that sent a chill through the volcanic community. Campi Flegrei wasn't just moving, it was breathing in 10 to 15 year cycles, inhaling the ground upwards by meters, then exhaling it back down in a rhythmic cadence of geological instability. INGV, Italy's National Geophysical Monitoring Agency, has now documented this deformation sequence in meticulous detail. 4 major episodes stand out like battle scars on the caldera's surface, from 1950 to 1952, when the initial stress began to build, from 1969 to 1972, when the volcano heaved upwards by a staggering 1.7 meters in just 3 years, from 1982 to 1984, when the deformation accelerated in lockstep with a storm of earthquakes, and from 2005 to the present, the crisis that is currently unfolding with no signs of stopping. Dr. Christopher Kilburn, a volcanologist at University College London, saw the warning signs decades before the current emergency began. In a groundbreaking study published in 2016, Kilburn predicted that Campi Flegrei would reach a critical failure threshold after just 30 to 40 additional centimeters of uplift. The caldera crossed that red line in 2023, but even Kilburn could not have foreseen the seismic nightmare that would follow. The first hint that something had fundamentally changed in Campi Flegrei's deformation pattern emerged in early 2023. Suddenly, the gradual ground oscillations that had defined the caldera's behaviour for centuries shifted into high gear. The volcano began rising faster than it ever had in recorded history. In a geological blink of an eye, the 3-year uplift sequence of the 1970s compressed into just 24 months. The 4-year timeline of the 1980s suddenly looked like a leisurely stroll compared to the seismic sprint now unfolding across the caldera. It was as if the volcano had been training for this moment for decades, biding its time until it could unleash the full fury of its pent-up stress. But even more alarming than the sheer speed of the uplift was the way it was distributed across the caldera. State-of-the-art GPS arrays, capable of measuring ground movement down to the millimeter, began painting a picture that looked less like a sleeping giant and more like an active combat zone. The ground was not rising uniformly as it had in previous episodes. Instead, it was deforming along jagged, massive, asymmetric patterns that traced the outlines of underground fault networks. In some areas, the land was rising by a staggering 15 millimeters per month. In others, it was stretching horizontally like putty, creating yawning chasms of invisible stress, just waiting for the right trigger to snap. Dr. Luca Daria, a geophysicist at INGV, describes the GPS data in terms that send a shiver down the spine. The deformation field is taking on geometries that resemble the final stages of a caldera collapse. We are seeing areas of extension coinciding with regions of intense uplift, a pattern consistent with major structural failure. In other words, the volcano is not just inflating like a balloon, it is tearing itself apart from the inside out, its ancient skeleton cracking and splintering under the relentless pressure of its own magmatic heartbeat. By the time the first emergency sirens began to wail across Naples in late 2023, Campi Flegrei had left Kilburn's worst-case scenario in the dust. The additional 30 to 40 centimeters of uplift he had predicted would signal the beginning of the end had come and gone like a distant memory. The caldera had now risen by a mind-boggling 147 centimeters, nearly 5 feet, and showed no signs of stopping. To put that number in perspective, it is the equivalent of a 5-story building suddenly thrusting itself out of the ground in the span of just 2 years. It is a rate of deformation that defies not just geological norms, but the very laws of physics that govern the behaviour of solid rock. And yet, the most chilling aspect of this unfolding crisis is not the speed of the deformation or even its sheer scale. It is the fact that scientists have seen this pattern before, not just in Campi Flegrei, but in volcanic systems around the world that have already passed the point of no return. From the shattered remains of Rupture caldera in Papua New Guinea to the yawning abyss of Long Valley in California, the warning signs are etched into the landscape like a geological obituary. Systematic uplift that builds across decades, then releases in a catastrophic instant. Ground deformation that traces the outlines of hidden fault networks, then tears them open like a zipper. Seismic swarms that start out as a whisper, then build to a deafening roar. These are the fingerprints of a rupture sequence in its terminal phase, a geological point of no return beyond which no amount of human intervention or wishful thinking can halt the inexorable march towards catastrophe. And now those same fingerprints are splashed across every GPS station, every seismograph, every satellite image streaming out of Campi Flegrei like a 21st century Rosetta Stone. The message they spell out is as clear as it is terrifying. The caldera is dying, and it is taking Naples with it. When the inevitable moment arrives, when the titanic forces now straining against the walls of the magma chamber finally find their release, the destruction will be unlike anything the modern world has ever seen. 5 feet of uplift may sound like an abstract number, but it is a death sentence for an urban landscape built on the assumption of geological stability. Ancient Roman ruins, like the Temple of Serapis, once proud testaments to human ingenuity, now serve as crumbling tombstones, marking the caldera's upward march. Modern buildings, their foundations warped and twisted beyond repair, tilt at sickening angles as if bowing in surrender to the volcano's inexorable will. And that is just the damage already visible on the surface. When the final rupture sequence begins in earnest, the crust beneath Naples will shatter like a pane of glass, hit by a sledgehammer. Entire city blocks will lurch upwards by 10 meters or more in a matter of seconds, their foundations disintegrating into rubble as the ground itself becomes a weapon of mass destruction. In Pozzuoli, the ancient fishing port that has huddled in the shadow of Campi Flegrei for millennia, the signs of impending doom are written in stone and water. The once bustling harbour, its ancient quays now sitting at absurd angles to the sea, stands as a silent monument to a geological process that has been slowly devouring the city from below for generations. As the deformation accelerates to a fever pitch, even the ocean itself will become a bearer of destruction. Tidal gauges strung across the bay register water levels rising and falling in tandem with the caldera's relentless upward march, a hydrological harbinger of the tsunami that will inevitably follow the final collapse. Further inland, the full scale of the catastrophe will unfold with merciless efficiency. Naples, a sprawling metropolis of 3 million people, will find itself ripped apart at the seams as the ancient rift zone that underlies the city cracks open like an egg. Highways will buckle and split as their foundations shatter beneath them. Bridges will collapse like matchsticks as their support pylons are swallowed whole by the hungry earth. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the coming apocalypse is the one that will unfold underground, out of sight of the panicked masses fleeing for their lives. Campi Flegrei's labyrinthine network of gas lines, water mains and sewage pipes, the unseen arteries that keep Naples alive, will rupture and twist as the very bedrock they are embedded in comes apart at the seams. In a matter of hours, entire neighbourhoods will be transformed into desolate wastelands as ruptured gas mains spark fires that rage unchecked through abandoned streets. Drinking water will turn to poison as shattered sewer lines dump millions of gallons of raw human waste into the city's aquifers. Hospitals, choked with the injured and the dying, will become tombs as the power grid collapses and life support systems flicker out one by one. And all the while, the relentless drumbeat of seismic destruction will continue unabated as the caldera rips itself apart from the inside out. With each passing minute, the odds of survival for those left behind will dwindle to the vanishing point, as the full weight of 75 years of accumulated geological stress comes crashing down on a city that has already been pushed beyond the breaking point. But the devastation will not stop at the water's edge. As the caldera floor collapses inward, it will drag the waters of the Bay of Naples down with it, unleashing a tsunami that will scour the coastline like a biblical plague. Shipping lanes will become death traps as 50-foot waves smash through hulls like tissue paper. Low-lying coastal towns will be wiped from the map as an ocean of debris-choked water rolls over them like an eraser over a blackboard. Further inland, the economic shockwaves will ripple outward with the force of a tectonic shift. Naples is the beating heart of southern Italy's economy, a vital hub of shipping, industry and tourism that powers the region like a geological engine. When that engine seizes and dies, it will take the livelihoods of millions with it. Highways choked with rubble and broken bridges will sever the arteries of commerce that keep the region alive. Factories will grind to a halt as their supply lines collapse and their workforce vanishes into the maelstrom of displaced humanity. Tourism, the lifeblood of the Mediterranean economy, will evaporate overnight as images of destruction beam across the world's televisions, like a 24/7 advertisement for the end of days. In the end, the true cost of Campi Flegrei's fury will not be measured in dollars and cents, but in the broken lives and shattered dreams of a region that may never recover. And that is a price tag too terrible to contemplate. As the GPS stations tick off each new centimetre of deformation and the seismographs paint a portrait of a caldera in its death throes, the scientific community has begun to converge on a grim consensus. The rupture sequence that began in 1950 has entered its terminal phase, and there is no turning back. Dr. Alessandro Bonaccorso, the man who has spent his career studying the intricate dance of ground deformation and volcanic activity, puts it in terms that are as unequivocal as they are devastating. The data tells us that the point of no return was passed long ago, he explains, his voice heavy with the weight of implication. We are not talking about a possibility or a probability anymore. We are talking about an inevitability. It is a sentiment echoed by every volcanologist, every geophysicist, every expert who has watched in stunned disbelief as Campi Flegrei has rewritten the rules of volcanic behaviour in real time. The forces now unleashed beneath Naples are beyond anything in human experience or scientific record. A geological juggernaut that has been building momentum for longer than most of us have been alive. And yet, even in the face of this unimaginable cataclysm, the men and women of science refuse to yield to despair. With each passing day, they pore over the data streaming in from 100 sensors and instruments, searching for patterns and anomalies that might offer a glimmer of hope in the gathering darkness. Perhaps the final collapse will come slowly, they whisper to themselves late at night, when the seismographs have finally fallen silent, and the only sound is the gentle hum of computer fans. Perhaps the caldera will exhale its fury in fits and starts, giving the people of Naples precious days, or even weeks, to flee the coming storm. But even as they cling to these fragile threads of optimism, the scientists know in their hearts what the data is telling them. The ground is rising faster than it ever has before, the fault networks are stretching to their breaking points, and the magma chamber is straining against its rocky prison like a beast fighting to be born. Sooner or later, whether it is in a day, a month, or a year, that chamber will finally give way, and the world, as we know it, will end in a roar of fire and fury that will make the gods themselves tremble. So as you watch the news feeds, the social media posts, and the frantic evacuations unfold in the coming days and weeks, remember this. You are witnessing the death of a city in real time, a front row seat to the apocalypse unfolding before your very eyes. This is Earth Attacks, where we bring you the unvarnished truth about the forces that are reshaping our world, one broken city at a time. If you want to stay ahead of the geological curve, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. When the ground starts to shake, you want to know exactly what is going on and how to avoid being swallowed up by the earth.